Have you ever walked into a company not to look for a job, but to protect the child you once held in your arms? Linda Wilson, 63, stood quietly in front of the glass doors of Aurora Tech, a startup in Austin, Texas. She wore a plain gray cardigan and a pair of worn-down soft-soled shoes. She wasn't carrying a polished resume. She didn't have a software engineering degree. And no one expected a retired woman to apply for an administrative assistant role at a company full of 20-somethings. But Linda wasn't there to chase a career she'd left behind. She was there for something far deeper. Her son, Daniel, was the founder of this company. And Linda held a secret no one at Aurora Tech knew. She was the company's largest shareholder, owning 18% of the startup from back in the days when Daniel had nothing but an idea and a few $1,000s from his mother's loan. Daniel didn't want his mom involved. He was a proud, ambitious young entrepreneur. But after her husband passed and she saw Daniel starting to buckle under pressure from big investors, Linda sensed something was off. So she decided to step inside, not as a mother, but as a regular employee, quietly observing from within. No one, not even Daniel, knew that she had the power to fire the CEO with a single signature. She didn't say a word. She simply smiled, took the ID badge labeled Linda W., and accepted the title Assistant Temp. Nobody paid much attention to her. A few employees even snickered behind her back about the old lady typing slower than a turtle. But Linda, with her seasoned eyes and a mother's heart, began to listen. And what she heard in the break room would change everything. Linda Wilson was born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. She had worked as the head accountant for a local grocery store chain for nearly 30 years before taking early retirement at 61 after her husband Frank passed away from pancreatic cancer. Her retirement life was peaceful, if a little lonely. The 3-bedroom suburban home was now quiet, save for her lavender garden and the hum of financial news playing on the radio each morning. Linda wasn't the kind of woman who cared for parties or social media. She cherished small things, brewing a cup of peppermint tea, recording expenses neatly in her notebook, and calling her son every night just to ask, "What did you eat today?" Daniel, her only son, was the pride of her life. He'd been a shy boy, glued to programming books since 8th grade, teaching himself to code by watching YouTube. After graduating from the University of Texas, he teamed up with 2 friends to launch Aurora Tech, a startup focused on building data management platforms for small businesses. Linda didn't understand much about tech, but she was the first to invest, $15,000, all her savings after Frank's death. She never saw it as an investment. She just wanted to give her son a chance. As the company grew, Daniel once asked if she'd like to join the board of directors. She declined. "I just want to know you're doing okay," she told him. "And if you ever need anything, I'm here." But lately, Daniel had gone quiet. The nightly calls stopped coming. One day, Linda stumbled across a LinkedIn post from a former employee that read, "Aurora's changing. It's no longer a people-first company." The words unsettled her. So she applied for a job no one wanted, administrative assistant, and got it without raising any eyebrows. At the office, Linda always arrived on time, brought a paper-wrapped sandwich, and drank water. She worked quietly, never complained, and didn't pull rank. But after a few days, she started picking up on whispers in elevators, break rooms, and unlocked email threads. Some employees were planning to push Daniel out and pivot the company to be more attractive to investors. Linda wasn't a hacker, but she was an accountant and a mother. And she knew if she didn't act, everything her son had built could vanish. She wasn't worried about herself. She lived frugally, had no debt, decent health care, and a modest pension. But realizing her son, Daniel, was being edged out of his own company in a behind-the-scenes power play ignited something deeper than the loneliness of aging, the fear of losing her child to people who never truly cared. One Tuesday afternoon, Linda overheard 2 mid-level managers talking in the break room. "Daniel's too inexperienced. If the board agrees, we just make Ben interim CEO. Done. Yeah, once we get the major investor to withdraw support from Daniel, it's game over. His mom? She's still figuring out how to print. Linda sat quietly in the corner, hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. What they didn't know was she was that major investor they were talking about. What broke Linda's heart wasn't their mockery, but Daniel's innocence. He trusted his co-founders, the management team, people who were now plotting behind his back to steer the company towards short-term profits, abandoning its original mission, protecting small businesses' data and privacy. If that plan succeeded, Daniel wouldn't just be pushed out. Aurora Tech would become another soulless tech giant, stripped of the very values it was built on, trust and decency. And Linda knew her son didn't have the armor to fight this alone. He'd inherited his father's kind heart, but not her tough skin. This wasn't just an office showdown. For Linda, it was the final battle of her life, to protect her only son and the values she held sacred. That night, she returned home and sat down in front of her old ledger, the one where she recorded her first investment in Daniel's dream. She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, share certificates, voting rights, and founding agreements. They think I'm useless, she whispered. Well, this time, they'll see what I've learned in 63 years. The next morning, Linda arrived at the office earlier than usual. The late autumn air in Austin was crisp, and a soft fog still clung to the third-floor windows where she worked. She planned to print a few reports for Daniel, a small habit that made her feel helpful. But when she opened the printer, she found a document jammed inside, left there from the night before. The title made her blood run cold. Internal Restructure Plan, Executive Removal Draft. Linda pulled out the printout and flipped through the pages. This wasn't just a plan to replace Daniel, it was a full strategy to approach investors and persuade them to withdraw their voting rights from the current CEO. Ben, the chief operating officer, was listed right at the top as Daniel's replacement. But what troubled her most was at the very end of the document, a shareholder chart where her name was labeled as inactive stakeholder, someone who technically held shares, but no longer had a voice. They're trying to erase me, she whispered, her chest tightening with a mix of fury and heartbreak. That afternoon, during a team meeting, Ben walked in with a blank expression. He gave Linda a slight nod, like she was just the janitor. When a new intern asked her to help locate some archived files, Ben glanced over at them and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Linda, no need to try so hard. Just sit tight and stay out of the way. We're here for performance, not emotions. The room went silent. A few people stared at their desks. Linda looked up, gave a small nod. No reaction. No anger. She simply gathered her papers and quietly organized her folder. She understood. The game was on. On the way home, Linda pulled over to the side of the road. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her phone. She called her attorney, an old friend from her days as a chief accountant, and said just one sentence. I need to prepare shareholder meeting documents earlier than expected. And I want to revisit the voting rights clause. Across the city, Daniel had no idea that the one person who loved him most in the world was about to become the final line of defense between him and a silent coup. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. The clock struck 2 a.m. Wind rattled the windows like warning bells. She sat alone in her kitchen, hands wrapped around a now cold cup of mint tea, eyes staring into the darkness beyond the glass. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. What am I doing? Will Daniel understand? Or will he think I'm interfering? Am I betraying his trust by digging into the company behind his back? Linda had never been the confrontational type. Her whole life, she chose patience and gentleness. She believed kindness, decency, and ethics would eventually find their way back to where they belonged. But this time was different. She felt herself being pulled into a role she hadn't prepared for, part mother, part shareholder, part dismissed woman. And while others plotted for power, she could think of only one thing: protecting Daniel from getting hurt. She wasn't afraid of Ben. She wasn't afraid of being insulted, or even of losing her investment. Her deepest fear was that her kind-hearted son would lose faith in people if he found out the very ones he trusted most were plotting to push him out. Linda rose from the kitchen table and walked into the small home office. She turned on the light. On the desk sat the shareholder folder and a printed copy of the company's original charter from the early days. On the last page was Daniel's youthful signature. He was just 27 then, next to Linda's firm, steady handwriting. She had just retired. At the bottom, a short note she had scribbled in ink. "I believe you'll build something good, and if you ever need it, I'll always be right behind you." Now, she had to prove that promise in a way she never had before, by fighting. Linda knew that if she took action, there'd be no turning back. She wouldn't just be confronting Ben, she might end up confronting her own son, if Daniel didn't understand why she had to do it. But then she asked herself, if I stay silent, how could I live with myself if I watched him get destroyed by greed? And so, in that quiet night, Linda, who had spent her life stepping quietly into the background, made a choice she couldn't undo. She would not stay silent. The next morning, Linda arrived at the office even earlier than usual, earlier than the receptionist. A thin autumn mist still hung outside the glass windows of Aurora Tech's 6th floor. The hallways were still and cold, filled only with the low hum of the HVAC. She carried a paper bag with cookies and coffee, just like always. Just another kind logistics assistant, invisible and polite. But this time, the bag didn't just contain coffee. Inside were copies of shareholder documents, the internal restructuring plan, and a list of silent investors, names she hadn't forgotten from board meetings years ago. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't a corporate player in the modern American sense. But she was an expert in accounting, corporate law, and human nature. That was her edge, one quietly earned over 30 years before retirement. Her first move was simple. She logged into her rarely used official shareholder email and sent a request to the company's legal department, requesting access to the current shareholder registry, the most recent board meeting minutes, and the updated internal charter. Respectfully, Linda E. Prescott. At the same time, she scheduled a coffee meeting with someone hardly anyone at the company paid attention to, Grace, a data analyst who'd once been close to Daniel during the company's early days. Linda's message was short and warm. "Hey kiddo, do you have 15 minutes sometime? I wanted to ask a quick question about tracking access to internal documents." Grace replied almost instantly. "Of course," she said. Linda smiled faintly. But not everything went smoothly. When she tried to access the system to retrieve archived meeting schedules, a feature she once used as an active stakeholder, the platform now required triple authentication and administrator approval. And the current admin? One of Ben's close allies. An hour later, Linda received a short internal message from Ben. "We noticed you attempted to access high-level governance documents. If you need anything, please go through me directly." The message was brief, cold, and crystal clear. The first warning shot had been fired. Linda sighed, feeling a twinge of anxiety. She wasn't used to being watched, and she didn't want to draw attention too early. But she knew this was the price of stepping into the game. She closed her laptop, took out a notebook, and began to write. Verify shareholder rights. Need attorney to finalize. Find allied investors. Call Jacob, Las Vegas. Reach out to Grace. Confirm covert activity. Linda didn't know exactly where this plan would lead, but she was sure of one thing. When a mother acts to protect her child, she's capable of things even she never imagined. 1 week later, Linda sat in a small coffee shop on South Congress Street, familiar to the locals in Austin, quiet but not too discreet. She chose a table by the window, holding a cup of cappuccino gone cold. Across from her sat Grace, the internal data analyst, her eyes tense and guarded. Grace lowered her voice. I didn't know who else to tell. Daniel would never suspect someone on the inside was using customer data to negotiate with outside investors. But I've seen it. Corporate client data files being downloaded at night, using temporary access credentials that only directors have. Linda tightened her grip on her cup. She nodded, trying to stay calm. Do you have proof? Grace slid over a small black USB drive. These are system logs. I copied them before they had a chance to wipe them. Linda slipped it into her purse as casually as if she were putting away an earring. At that moment, she realized this wasn't just poor management, it was a scheme to sell out the company. And Daniel had no idea. On her way home, she stopped by the law office of her former colleague, a sharp-minded middle-aged woman named Eleanor, who had worked with Linda back in her accounting firm days. After reviewing the materials, Eleanor leaned back in thought, then said, Linda, if your suspicions are correct, they're trying to manufacture a pretext to push Daniel out by orchestrating a fake financial failure. And if they control the board, they can do it. Linda was silent. After a moment, she answered, her voice steady. I want to call a special shareholders meeting. Eleanor looked up. You hold 18% of the shares. That's enough to call it. But you won't win a vote alone. You'll need at least 30% to temporarily block any restructuring decisions. Linda pressed her lips together, then said, like she was recalling old faces one by one. I know who holds the other 12%. An old friend of my late husband's, Jacob, in Las Vegas. He invested because he believed in Daniel, not for profit. If he still believes, I can get to 30%. And in that moment, Linda's strategy shifted. She was no longer just a mother quietly protecting her son. She would become the one leading the charge. A woman once dismissed and underestimated, now stepping into a power no one saw coming. 2 weeks later, on an otherwise normal Monday morning at Aurora Tech, the entire executive board received an email no one expected. The subject line was crystal clear and carried the weight of warning. Request to convene a special shareholders meeting. From Linda E. Prescott, founding shareholder, 18% stake. Authorized by Jacob Merritt, 12% stake. Attached was a legal signature from Eleanor's firm, along with a list of corporate bylaw violations and concerns about internal data being transferred externally without board approval. Within 6 hours, the news had spread across the office. Daniel was stunned. He hadn't seen his mother send an official company email since her retirement. He didn't know what was going on, but the words special meeting and proxy authorization told him this wasn't just internal noise. Up on the 8th floor, executive suite, Ben turned red with rage. That old lady, who the hell does she think she is? What Ben didn't realize was that he had completely misjudged his opponent. In his eyes, Linda was just a retired suburban mom from North Austin who liked gardening and walking her dog. But he had forgotten. Linda used to be the head of financial audit at a multinational corporation. She had stood before rooms of hundreds defending every dollar, every line of a budget. And now she was back because her son was being stabbed in the back by the very man she once trusted. 3 days later, the special shareholders meeting was held in a Hyatt Regency conference room overlooking the Colorado River. Local media even sent reporters, spurred by rumors of a surprise power shift inside Aurora Tech. The room was packed. Linda walked in wearing a light gray coat, her hair neatly tied back. No diamonds, no assistant, no theatrics, just a file folder, a USB drive, and a gaze cold as steel. As the room buzzed, she tapped the table. Before we begin, I'd like to present several internal documents regarding misconduct tied to customer data, company bylaws, and the neglect of shareholder rights. The tech assistant plugged in the USB to the projector. On the screen appeared system login records, proving that Ben had accessed the system after hours, extracted data, and sent it to an IP address registered to a rival investment fund. The room fell into complete silence. Daniel looked at his mother, speechless. Linda remained calm. I'm not here to divide this company. I'm here to protect the one my son built back when he was surviving on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I've stayed silent for far too long. But today, I want to remind everyone, I'm not just Daniel's mother. I'm a founding shareholder. And I have the right to speak. In that moment, Linda seized the momentum completely. From a woman who had been underestimated, she became the one leading the entire room. No one called her useless anymore. They called her Madam Prescott. After that meeting, nothing was the same. Word of Linda's bold move spread quickly throughout the company, and soon the outside world took notice. Investors began demanding answers, and the media started asking hard questions about Aurora Tech's future. Everyone knew a major power struggle was unfolding, just not one this intense. Linda's phone rang nonstop with calls from shareholders. Some offered support. Others worried about legal risks. But Linda stood firm. Ben, on the other side of the conflict, couldn't stomach being outmaneuvered, especially not at the very first meeting. The very next day, just as Linda was leaving the office after a meeting with Eleanor, her phone rang. Ben. Linda, I think it's time we talked face to face. Everything you're doing is only making things worse. You don't know what you're getting into. I'm giving you a chance to walk away before this becomes irreversible. Linda stared at the phone. She knew this wasn't just a threat. This was the showdown she'd been preparing for all along, only now it was finally beginning. The meeting took place on a quiet Friday evening at a bar near Zilker Park, the same one they'd met at years ago, back when the company was still just a dream. The room glowed in soft amber light, but the air felt thick, like a storm was coming. Ben arrived first, wearing a black suit, face calm and composed. Linda sat in the corner as poised as ever, but her eyes were sharp, like someone about to make a life-or-death call. Ben sat down. His tone was measured, but unmistakably laced with challenge. Linda, I honestly don't understand what you're trying to do. You're just a mother. You can't possibly grasp what I'm doing to save this company. You don't have the expertise, the authority to steer this ship. Linda didn't respond right away. She waited, then calmly set down her wine glass. She looked Ben straight in the eye, her voice unwavering. Ben, I don't need to understand everything the way you think. I only need to understand this. Aurora Tech doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all of us who helped build it. And I won't let you destroy it for your own gain. Ben scoffed, but Linda didn't flinch. You can claim temporary control, but real power doesn't come from owning a company. Real power comes when people respect and trust you. You have neither. You only have numbers on a spreadsheet and a bag full of shady schemes. Ben's jaw clenched. Linda watched him closely, reading every flicker of emotion. She knew now this wasn't just a battle over shares. It was a battle over character, over leadership. Several seconds passed in silence before Ben stood abruptly, fury in his voice. You're going to regret this, Linda. You forced me to do things I didn't want to do. Linda didn't budge. Her gaze was steady, like the calm before a rising tide. Do it, Ben. I've been ready for this a long time. As Ben turned to leave, Linda pulled out her phone and sent a short message to Jacob. Thank you for helping me secure the shares. It's time to close this. The following Monday at 9 a.m., Aurora Tech's annual shareholders meeting convened at a downtown Austin convention center. It was expected to be the usual dull affair: financial reports, a few PowerPoint slides, and a forgettable lunch. No one anticipated it would become a historic turning point. From every direction, shareholders arrived, some out of curiosity after the internal conflict had leaked to the press, others after receiving notice of a motion to replace the current CEO. Ben entered the room wearing his trademark confident smile, still convinced he had the votes to stay in power. He had no idea Linda had quietly rallied dozens of small shareholders, people long ignored, to assemble a decisive voting bloc. Linda took the stage in an ivory suit, simple, elegant. She didn't use a microphone, but her voice rang out clearly in the quiet room. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here today not just as a co-founder, but as a mother. A woman who once believed it was time to step back and let the next generation lead. But what I've witnessed these past few months proves one thing. Silence does not protect a company's future. It only enables unethical behavior. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. We need a change in leadership. I propose a vote to remove the current CEO, Mr. Ben Granger, and to establish a temporary executive committee to restructure the company's governance. The room erupted in murmurs. Ben jumped to his feet. This is abuse of power. Who gave you the authority? Linda calmly opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, signed proxies, representing her own shares and those temporarily transferred to her. The total, 51.3%. This is authority. And it doesn't come from threats or backroom deals. It comes from trust. The room fell into stunned silence. The vote happened immediately after. There was little debate. A wave of hands went up. The final results. Ben Granger removed from CEO position. 63% approval. Formation of an interim executive committee. 89% approval. Interim chairperson nominated by shareholders. Linda Prescott. Daniel sat in the back, eyes red. He never imagined that his mother, the person he always feared would get hurt, would be the one to stand in the eye of the storm and turn it into a moment of historic change. Ben left the meeting room in silence. Gone was the arrogance. Gone were the threats. All that remained was the look of defeat. Linda, meanwhile, didn't celebrate. She looked down at the employees standing in the back, those who had remained silent for too long out of fear of losing their jobs. She said, "Today we didn't beat anyone. We simply reclaimed what should never have been lost: trust, transparency, and integrity in business." This was the climax of the story. Linda hadn't just brought down a saboteur, she had restored order, defended her son's honor, and protected the hundreds of employees who gave their best every day. After that historic shareholders meeting, Aurora Tech felt reborn. News of the event spread quickly across financial media, Forbes, Bloomberg Tech, and more. Headlines like "Mother Rises to Save Her Son's Company from Collapse" or "The Hidden Matriarch Behind the Power Shakeup in Austin" appeared everywhere. But for Linda, real change didn't come in headlines. It came that afternoon when she was alone in the now-empty conference room, quietly sorting through a stack of papers. Daniel walked in, holding 2 cups of hot coffee. "I didn't know which one you like," he said, setting them down on the table. Linda smiled. They hadn't really talked much since everything had unfolded. Daniel stepped closer, his hands awkwardly shoved into his pockets. He was no longer the confident executive, but just a son. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was afraid you'd get hurt," Linda replied gently. "But maybe it was you who got hurt because you didn't trust me." A silence settled between them. Daniel stepped forward and hugged her. For the first time in years, he held her like he did as a child, not because he needed help, but because he knew he had been protected. "I always thought I had to protect you," he whispered. "Turns out, you were protecting all of us." Linda gently squeezed his arm, her eyes drifting toward the window where sunlight poured into the building. For the first time in a long time, at age 62, she felt something unexpected. She mattered. Inside the company, change was rippling outward. Employees who had long endured authoritarian management began to speak up. A transparency and improvement task force was formed, with Linda serving as a quiet advisor. Eleanor, the young employee who first believed in Linda, was promoted to HR director. "Because you saw value where others didn't," Linda said at the announcement. As for Ben, he vanished from the tech scene for a while. Rumors said he was trying to start another company in Dallas, but no investor trusted him the way they once did. Linda didn't hold on to power for long. After 6 months of restructuring, she stepped back, remaining as a major shareholder and senior advisor to Daniel. But now, no one in the company dared to call her outdated. One former employee who had once criticized her left a note on her desk before resigning. Thank you for teaching me that silence should never be the default. I hope one day I can be as brave as you. From someone dismissed as irrelevant, Linda had become a leader. But more importantly, she had healed her relationship with her son not through force, but with timely silence and decisive action. Linda didn't enjoy media attention. After that fateful shareholders meeting, she turned down most interview requests. When the Wall Street Journal called, she simply smiled. I didn't do it for a story. I did it for my son. And because I couldn't stand being silent anymore. Ironically, it was her actions after that moment that made her a quiet legend within Aurora Tech. First, she proposed the creation of a Values and Legacy Committee, a completely new department tasked with documenting the company's founding history, analyzing past ethical crises, and, most importantly, creating a mentoring program to connect founding members and senior shareholders with younger staff. Linda personally led the first class. Every Friday afternoon, she sat in a small third-floor meeting room with a group of 10 to 12 new hires, sharing stories from the early days of the company, lessons learned from failure, and the loneliness of being thought obsolete. One afternoon, Eleanor, the young woman who once stood by her when others dismissed her, asked, Ms. Linda, if you had a chance to do it over, would you still step away and retire like you did before? Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, eyes glimmering with wisdom. I think retiring is part of life. But giving up your sense of value? That's never the right choice. If there's a next time, I'll still step back, but I'll never stop watching. Because the people you love, sometimes they need an umbrella ready when the rain starts to fall. Daniel, her son, also changed. He no longer carried every decision on his shoulders. During board meetings, he started asking for his mother's opinion. Not because she was a shareholder, but because he had learned to trust her. Inside the company, people started calling Linda the Silent Shield. The name never appeared on paper, but it was written everywhere that mattered. Written in marker on the whiteboard in the lobby, just beneath the photo commemorating the relaunch of Aurora Tech. Around the same time, Linda was invited as an honorary guest speaker at the graduation ceremony of the University of Texas at Austin, the school where her son had studied, and a stage Linda had never stood on as a speaker. She stepped up, dressed as simply as always, and ended her speech with just one sentence. Listen to the people you think no longer matter. They just might be the ones who save you when you least expect it. Linda didn't become the CEO. She didn't need to. She became something greater, a living example that growing older doesn't mean fading away. Her story spread across LinkedIn, leadership podcasts, and family gatherings throughout America as living proof that age is never a barrier when it comes to standing up for what you love. March in Austin was still a little chilly. Linda sat on a wooden chair on her front porch, a cup of mint tea in her hand, gazing out at the small garden where lavender had just begun to bloom. It was a quiet Saturday morning, no emails, no meetings, no more criticism or suspicious glances like in those early days at Aurora Tech. All of that was behind her now. But memories, like all the important things in life, remained intact. Linda thought back to the first time she walked into the office as a temporary hire. The old cardigan, the faded flats, the cautious stares from everyone, and especially Ben's eyes, the man who once said she was just good at standing around and watching. Ironically, that's exactly what she did, and it saved the entire company. Sometimes, observation is the most powerful action, she thought. Linda also remembered raising Daniel alone after her husband passed away. When he started his business, she quietly invested the first of her retirement savings into Aurora Tech, no name, no title. Just one thing, faith. I used to think retiring was the best way to not be a burden to anyone, she whispered to herself. But I've come to understand that sometimes our absence leaves a hole where the worst things can creep in. And it was true. Had she not returned, the company might have been manipulated. Her son could have lost his career and his belief in himself. Linda never saw herself as a hero. She was simply a mother who refused to let go. A breeze swept through her silver hair. She looked across the yard. Daniel was planting flowers with his young daughter. That little 5-year-old had once run up to hug her on the day Aurora Tech changed presidents and said, "Grandma, you're a superhero." Linda smiled. Maybe to that little girl, she was. But to herself, she was simply someone who'd learned that silence can be strength, and that sometimes the quietest woman in the room can become the loudest voice. A year ago, Linda had walked into the Aurora Tech headquarters in her usual simple clothes, carrying an old tote bag and a resume printed at the public library. No one in the office knew she was the company's largest shareholder. No one asked why a 63-year-old woman was looking for work. And certainly, no one imagined that the quiet lady who brewed tea and sat in the back corner of HR had once laid the first brick that built the entire company. Now, she returned to that same office, but in an entirely different role. No longer the retired lady who got bored at home. No more dismissive glances from higher-ups or guarded looks from younger colleagues. No more feeling like she had to prove her worth. Instead, she walked in as a senior strategic advisor, the founder of the Bridging Generations program, and the embodiment of the core values Aurora Tech had once claimed but forgotten: loyalty, humility, and hard-earned wisdom. In the past, Linda often stayed quiet during meetings. She listened more than she spoke, sometimes wondering, am I still relevant? Not anymore. Now, every time she spoke, the room fell silent. People listened not because she was the CEO's mother, but because they knew every word she said was grounded in bone-deep experience. There was a time when Linda wondered if she should retire completely. Rest, garden, read, let the days pass gently. But now she understood. Rest doesn't mean retreat. A woman can fully live out her later years without having to disappear from the game. Personally, Linda had changed too. She began attending local mentoring workshops, supporting women-led small businesses across Texas. She started journaling and was finishing her first memoir, titled Never Too Late to Return. She used to live to support her son. Now, she lives to pass down strength not just to Daniel, but to the generation that follows. From a quiet mother standing behind the spotlight, Linda had become the foundation beneath the company and a symbol of mature resilience in American corporate culture. Ben, the manager who once called Linda useless in an early meeting, had left Aurora Tech. But in a farewell email to the board, he wrote, "I misjudged. I thought I was running a startup and forgot the person who built the company was sitting quietly in the corner, watching me dismantle it." Linda was the most humbling lesson of my career. Eleanor, the young woman who once helped Linda print her resume, was now her special assistant in the mentoring program. In a company-wide meeting, she stood before hundreds of new employees and said, "Linda isn't like anyone from her generation. And maybe my generation needs more people like her than we'd care to admit." Daniel, Linda's son, was once uncomfortable with his mother being in the office. He feared the gossip, worried she might feel out of place. But now, every time he introduced the company to a partner or investor, he led them to the memorial board by the staircase on the first floor. There, right next to the photo from Aurora Tech's very first launch. It was a recent photo, Linda at a mentoring session, pen in hand, surrounded by a circle of young employees leaning in to listen. "This is the soul of our company," Daniel often said. In Austin's startup scene, Linda's name began to surface, not as some flashy CEO, but as the quiet flamekeeper. A few companies invited her to be an advisor. Universities asked her to teach about leadership and generational transition. One former employee, who had quit after feeling the company had lost its humanity, wrote on LinkedIn, "If I had known Linda was still there, I never would have left." A company with someone like her never loses its roots. And in the hearts of those who knew her, Linda wasn't just a mother. Not just a shareholder. Not just a mentor. She had become a living symbol of something many thought had disappeared from the modern tech world: values, depth, and steadfastness. Her recognition didn't come from a title or a bonus check. It came from the quiet shift in how people looked at her. Linda didn't have to say much because her life had spoken for her. At Aurora Tech's year-end strategy meeting, every employee, from fresh-out-of-college programmers to senior managers, gathered in the grand hall. It was a heartfelt review of the year. Each department shared its progress. Applause rang out not just for the numbers, but for how far they had come through a stormy, uncertain time. At the end, Daniel stepped onto the stage. He didn't look at the slides. He just said, "I used to think I founded this company. But today, I realize the one who truly kept it alive is sitting in the second row." All eyes turned toward Linda. She stood, slowly, not shy, not boastful, just with her familiar calm smile and that steady, soulful gaze. She walked up to the stage, took the mic and spoke, not with the booming voice of a keynote speaker, but with the grounded, resonant tone of a mother who had lived, listened, endured, and chosen just the right moment to speak. "I didn't come back to take back power. I came to protect what my son once believed in. I know I'm not great at coding. I'm not fluent in Slack or Trello, but I'm good at listening. And I believe that a successful company doesn't just need innovation, it needs to honor its roots. Never underestimate someone just because they dress simply or because they've retired. Sometimes, that person holds the final key to saving the whole ship." The room fell silent. Not out of shock, but because her words touched something deep. Something everyone had felt, but never dared to say aloud. Linda didn't need fireworks. But that evening, as she stepped out of the building, a quiet line had formed, young employees waiting to shake her hand. No formal speeches, just grateful eyes. Some whispered, "Thank you." One young woman said, "If I turn out like you, I won't be afraid of getting old." And that's when Linda understood. The most powerful kind of redemption isn't making others pay. It's helping them grow. That night, Linda returned to her small house in the northern suburbs of Austin. Her morning cup of Earl Grey still sat on the kitchen counter, cold. She sat down, opened her weathered notebook, the one where she scribbled thoughts when life gave her a quiet moment, and wrote, "Maybe people aren't afraid of growing old. Maybe they're just afraid of being forgotten." She closed the notebook, made herself a fresh cup of tea, and looked out the window. Across the fence, the new family that had just moved in were laughing while their kids chased each other around the yard. Life was moving on. But this time, Linda wasn't watching from the sidelines. She had stepped back onto the stage at the right moment, in the right way, for the right reason. And the question she left behind wasn't meant for just one person, it was for all of us. Have you ever misjudged someone just because they were quiet? And are you sure you know who's really steering the ship you're on? You don't have to be a founder. You don't need to be the biggest shareholder. And you don't need a dramatic comeback like Linda's. But maybe, just maybe, her story can help you take a second look at your own life. At work, at home, or in your own heart. Are you ignoring the quietest people around you? And if one day they finally speak up, will you be humble enough to listen? If this story made you reflect, leave a comment below. Who is the Linda in your life? And are you ready to see them, really see them, before it's too late? Backhand index pointing right, share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow for more true, thoughtful, and inspiring stories like this one. Let's start with something simple. Listen to someone you've overlooked. Today,